You should have watched the movie in section 4.3.1 by now, and I hope you enjoyed it. Today I want to start with the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. Okay. In 65, Lyndon Johnson was president. Kennedy was assassinated a couple years earlier, and Johnson has started his War on Poverty program, trying to build, quote, the Great Society. Part of that was a major investment of the federal government in public education. And the Elementary and Secondary Education Act has been renewed or reauthorized by almost every president since then. It is currently called No Child Left Behind. It's the same law that's been slightly morphed by every president throughout, the intervening 50 years, except for President Obama, actually. It was the very first thing passed by George W. Bush. It should have been reauthorized about 7 years ago, but still hasn't. Hopefully President Obama and Congress can figure out how to improve it and reauthorize it. The major thing in the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that you're going to need to know is one subsection of it. It's called Title I. Title I is a compensatory program, meaning it compensates for something. This is the part of the law, even today in No Child Left Behind, where most of the money goes. Title I is focused on compensatory education for basically poor children with low socioeconomic status. It supplies supplemental reading, tutoring, that kind of thing, and it's allocated based on how many children attend a school that are on free and reduced lunch. Okay. The federal government gives the money to the states, which then is allocated out to the local districts. In Boise, a school has to have greater than 50% free and reduced lunch kids in order to access the Title I schools. That way they try to concentrate the money so it can do more good for the most needy children, rather than give, whatever it is, maybe $50 allocated to every poor student throughout the district. They concentrate that money in areas of greatest need. Okay? So that's 1965. In 1972, totally unrelated to Title I, a law was passed which is referred to as Title IX. Most of you have heard of Title IX associated with girls playing sports. Okay? However, Title IX is broader than that. It says basically that no institution accepting federal funds may discriminate on the basis of gender. So that's the major law for gender equity. Within athletics, it's been the most controversial. Within the academic world and with access to programs between boys and girls, it hasn't been that controversial. Okay, so that's 72. 1974, a famous court case reached the Supreme Court called Milliken versus Bradley. Milliken was the governor of Michigan, and I happened to be living in Michigan at the time. In 1974, I was in 4th grade. I was a student in Detroit during the great busing controversy, and this Supreme Court case, Milliken v. Bradley, was directly about busing. If you don't know much about Detroit, Detroit is a majority-minority city. Okay, most of the people that live within the city boundaries of Detroit are minorities. Thus, when it came to integrating their schools, they tried to force the suburban districts that surrounded Detroit to basically swap students with them to try to reach a more equitable racial balance. Well, the suburban districts wanted no part of that. The court case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided that the surrounding school districts held no obligation to integrate with the urban district. It had to be within district boundaries. This was, as far as the civil rights struggle is concerned, this was a loss along the program. And let me just tell you about my childhood a little bit. I remember when this was all happening. Detroit was just reeling from the collapse of the automobile industry. In fact, basically, if you worked in Detroit at the time, everyone worked for the auto companies. Whether they did or didn't, the economic influence of the big three, which would be Chrysler, Ford, and GM, reached everywhere. So whether you worked for them or not, indirectly, you were tied to their financial strength. When I was a kid, I remember in classes making picket signs as art projects, and then the teachers would actually march us around the neighborhood trying to pass millages or stop busing. And when busing was enforced, it was about the same time a new mayor was elected in Detroit, Coleman Young. And Coleman Young was an African-American mayor that basically said, if you don't like it, move north of 8 Mile Road, leave the city. 8 Mile Road is the northern border of the city of Detroit, and it's a huge symbol, basically between whites and blacks. That's why it's the title of Eminem's movie. Well, anyway, because of all the racial tension, we had the 1967 race riots. Through the 70s, something occurred called white flight. Basically, all the affluent people, mostly of whom were white, left the city of Detroit if they could. My own family wasn't part of that initially. We actually left the city in 1976. And actually, when busing came into Detroit, I lived in an integrated neighborhood. Went to a school that was probably, 70 or 80% white, 20 or 30% black. But because it was a majority-minority city, they needed to move white kids over to all black areas to try to balance it out a little bit. So I was going to be bused across town to a much more dangerous part of the town. At that time, my mom and dad actually bribed their way into a local Catholic high school by giving the pastor there actually a half-gallon of Beefeater's gin. I still remember being in my dentist's office, which was across the street from the Catholic school, and I'm sitting there, and in walks the pastor and my dad. And my dad gave him a fifth of Beefeater's gin, and next thing I knew, I was going to Catholic school. That's how it happened. It's kind of strange. That was for the 75-76 year, and then our house got infested with rats, and that was the final straw, and we left the city. So I spent the second half of my childhood in the country. And I'm talking like serious country. I lived next to a rhubarb farm. I went from Detroit to living next to a rhubarb farm. It was pretty wild. So that's 74. Milliken v. Bradley has to do with cross-district busing. Also in 1974, there was a landmark case called Lau v. Nichols that had a major effect on bilingualism or bilingual education. The basis of bilingual education in this country actually is not based on Hispanic people. It was originally based on the Chinese in the San Francisco area. Lau was representing the Chinese families, and the problem was this. The San Francisco public education system treated everyone equally. Okay? Everyone got exactly the same thing. Well, you had Chinese kids who didn't even know what the letter A looked like, sitting in classes where they weren't getting any special help at all. They were being treated equally to the kids that had grown up there. Well, eventually the case went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided that equal is not equitable. Okay? Sometimes you need to be unequal between people to have an equal outcome, to give them an equal chance. That the bilingual children needed some type of special program to give them equal access to the curriculum. Because the curriculum was written with different characters, different language, they did not have access to it, and therefore it was found to be a violation of the 14th Amendment. However, the Lau decision did not mandate any particular type of bilingual approach. It just said districts should have to do something special to get these kids to have access to the curriculum. Okay. Bilingual education can now pretty much be broken down, and this is very simplistic. If there are any bilingual majors in the class, I apologize for reducing your whole field to just the 3 options. But generally, if you want to think about bilingual education, you can think about them as broken down into 3 separate areas. There's immersion, which is mostly English-based education. It's kind of a sink-or-swim model with a little bit of help on the side. That's immersion. Okay. There's maintenance. Instruction is given in the native language while the students are learning English along on the side. because they don't want the children to fall behind in their academic areas, strictly due to language. So they teach them in their home language and then bring up their English competency. Okay, immersion was based on English competency is the most important. Let's get that done first. That's why it's the sink or swim model. So you have immersion, you have maintenance, and you also have dual language immersion. We actually have a couple of those programs right here in Boise, in which everyone in the school, teachers, all students, learn 2 languages. It could be mornings are English, afternoons are Spanish, or Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday are English, Thursday, Friday are Spanish, or whatever language. There is one school that's attempting to be dual language bilingual with French. That's the Sage International School. I'm not quite sure how that's going. But in dual language, all students will graduate or leave the school bilingual, meaning they're fluent in 2 languages. So that's 1974 Lau v. Nichols. 1975 is PL 94-142. That's PL 94-142. That's a public law. That's what the PL stands for. And that gave the basis for special education. That eventually morphed into another law that we currently call IDEA, which stands for Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Okay, IDEA. Most people do not call it IDEA. So if you're going to take a special ed class, refer to it as IDEA, not IDEA. Okay? For IDEA, there are 3 terms I'm going to want you to know. The first is IEP, which stands for Individualized Educational Program. Every special ed kid needs an IEP, which is basically a contract between the student and his or her parents and the school explaining what that student's targets are going to be and how the school is going to help them reach it. There are many, many, many lawsuits in special education, and most of them are based on a violation of the IEP or an interpreted in violation of the IEP. Now, the 2 bigger ideas in PL 94-142 are FAPE and least restrictive environment. FAPE is FAPE. It stands for Free and Appropriate Public Education. It guarantees all children a free and appropriate public education. Like you can't just stick a kid in a physics class if they can't do single-digit addition. That's not appropriate. So you have to find out what's appropriate for the child and give that child the education that is due them as American citizens. And you cannot charge them for it. That's where the free is. So that's FAPE. The second major area, which is subservient to the first, FAPE is most important. You have to have it free and appropriate. The second big idea is least restrictive environment, LRE. Okay. When you're placing a kid, you can't just say, oh, okay, let's take all the special ed kids and throw them in the closet. Right? That's what used to happen prior to 1974 or 75 in a lot of places. What you have to do when placing a special ed child is start with a normal classroom. Okay? Do we think, let's say, a special ed kid's name's Phil. Do we think Phil can make it in a special ed classroom, in a normal classroom without any help? That would be the least restrictive environment. If the answer is no, can he make it in a normal classroom with an aide? Can he make it in a pull-out program where he's in a normal classroom part of the time, in a special ed classroom some of the time? Does he have to be in a self-contained special ed classroom all the time? Does he have to be in a special school? Boise has a program called Ascent, where the whole school only has about a dozen, maybe 2 dozen kids, but they are extremely emotionally impaired and they can't interact with the general population. So you start with a normal classroom, and then you back away to more and more differentiated from the normal classroom. And you want to place the kid in the least restrictive environment. And this is a measure to try to avoid segregating the children based on their educational handicap. Those are the major points for Module 4. Oh, one important thing. Module 4 is light in content. Module 5 is heavy. So get through Module 4 and go right into Module 5. Don't wait for the week to turn over. All right? Have a good day. Bye.